Berlin wasn't always Germany's capital. It was in Bonn that the foundation for West German democracy was laid, in a provincial town in the west of the country.
In a small town, unassuming, peaceful, pretty, and certainly not threatening.
But how did Western Europe's most populous nation end up with such a modest capital? And what's with the giraffe? Stick around to find out. Germany after World War II, a country in ruins. At the start of the Cold War, it split in two, East and West. Isolated, guilt-ridden, and ashamed. How to start over? The Western Allies had demands. The Germans must build a democracy, a republic they can engage with, a parliament. But where? Which crumbling city should lead the way? Berlin, the traditional capital, was enclosed within the Soviet sector and divided. But that's not the only reason it was ruled out.
West Germany was born in the shadow of the Nazi catastrophe. The architecture and governing style had to move away from Nazi gigantomania. There could be nothing that reminded people of Speer's Reichskanzlei, for example, which was built for Hitler.
Berlin was the seat of regimes that triggered 2 world wars. The new state needed a clear break. The front-runner, Frankfurt, a major city centrally located and home to the historic Paulskirche, where Germany's first democratic assembly met. The city seemed to fit the bill, ample infrastructure, and even an airport. But West Germany wanted a fresh start, and that's where Bonn came in. A small university town on the Rhine, it's the birthplace of Beethoven. And known for its annual carnival celebrations, too. Its location in the far west was perfect for the integration with Western Europe.
The expectation was that reunification could happen within 5 to 10 years. They intentionally chose a small town so they wouldn't get too comfortable there.
And then there was the influence of one major politician who was pro-Bonn through and through.
Adenauer was already the favorite to become chancellor. He said he'd only do it if Bonn was the capital. He had his house in Röhrendorf nearby. He was old and, I assume, didn't feel like moving.
Fact or fiction? Fact is, Konrad Adenauer was a seasoned politician from the Weimar era and a staunch opponent of Nazism. As former mayor of Cologne, he was known for his pragmatism and his dry humor.
They said Adenauer only had a vocabulary of 800 words. But he spoke clearly and directly. His style helped him find majorities quickly. He was certainly a gifted politician.
But could he succeed here? Bonn was hardly prepared for the role. Where would they work on such a massive task? They took what they could find. In the atrium of a natural history museum, among stuffed animals and dioramas, the Parliamentary Council held its opening ceremony. Exhibits were hastily hidden behind curtains. Legend has it that this giraffe was too tall and needed an extra long curtain, making it the unofficial mascot of the new constitution. This basic law was designed as a provisional foundation for democracy. The backdrop? A teacher's college. It was here in the gymnasium where 65 delegates from the West German states spent months until the Basic Law, or the Grundgesetz, was finally passed. 2 days later, the council narrowly elected Bonn as the provincial seat of government. Food came from the local kiosk.
Es gab damals nichts.
There was nothing to be had back then, after the war. And people needed food for the soul and the body. The press and the first politicians all gathered here at my mother's kiosk, the Bundesbüttchen.
Naturally, journalists poked fun at the small town. Delegates used to say the best thing about Bonn was the train to Munich.
Yet the town was ideal for the press. Everything was within walking distance. You'd bump into politicians on every corner. Haley Ihlefeld knew exactly where to get the best scoops.
Some politicians played the card game Skat. They didn't have much to do in the evening, so they met at the Rheinlust beer garden. As a journalist, you picked up a lot there.
Chancellor Konrad Adenauer wanted to send a clear signal that Germany would be a reliable partner for peace. Reconciliation with France and joining the Western military alliance NATO, it was all negotiated in Bonn.
Unsere außenpolitische Arbeit wird nicht nur für die Bundesrepublik, sondern für eine friedliche und gesicherte Zukunft eines wiedervereinigten Deutschlands geleistet.
Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik meant seeking forgiveness for German crimes. He signed treaties with Poland and the USSR, a balancing act that paved the way for reunification. Never again war from German soil was a guiding principle in Bonn.
To govern in a way that serves peace. And incidentally, prosperity. But that's not hard, of course. When everything is in ruins, the only way is up. But peace, just peace.
Helmut Schmidt founded the G7 with other major industrial nations, thereby strengthening West Germany's role in the alliance.
Unsere Freunde und Nachbarn, unsere Bündnis- und Vertragspartner in der Welt sollen wissen, dass die Positionen unserer Außen- und Sicherheitspolitik unverändert bleiben.
There was no better ally than West Germany because of the fact that it was the object of the Cold War. It was Germany, East and West, that was the core of the Cold War.
Bonn had arrived on the world stage, and the world came to Bonn. In the following decades, over 130 embassies opened here. State visits followed. Queen Elizabeth, JFK, Margaret Thatcher, and George W. Bush. Even the Pope visited.
Die großen entscheidenden Mächte waren natürlich erst einmal.
The major deciding powers were very pleased that democracy was stabilizing in West Germany.
In der Bundesrepublik sich bewährte und stabilisierte. Gleichwohl
But at the same time, the British and French, and to a lesser degree the Americans, were used to global hubs like London or Paris. Some diplomats were actually underwhelmed by Bonn. It was a town that had the reputation for being provincial, and there was a lack of nightlife.
Sehr provinziell zu sein, über kein Nachtleben zu verfügen.
Since 1961, it was clear that the provisional capital was here to stay, at least for now. The building of the Berlin Wall made it clear. The Cold War wasn't ending anytime soon.
A lot of people came to the conclusion unification is a unicorn. It is not going to happen. The wall, the division of Germany, would be the price that we had to pay for losing the war.
Settling into the idea of division, Germany started building. Ministries expanded. The so-called Langer Eugen, a landmark jutting into a new skyline, the new chancellery, and the chancellor's bungalow reflected the republic's new image.
ein transparentes
It was a transparent, light, single-story building surrounded by huge glass walls. A deliberate move toward modern architecture.
Umgeben und eine bewusste Hinwendung zur Architektur Moderne und damit auch ein
It was meant to connect Germany to the modernity of the Western world.
Gefühlte Modernität der westlichen Welt.
And the Beethoven-Halle, a tribute to the city's most famous son. To be a true capital, Bonn needed a new look of paint, a more vibrant cultural landscape. This masterpiece of post-war modernism became a flagship for the young democracy.
Was ich sehr geliebt habe an dieser
I loved the understatement of the Bonn era, moving away from displays of power. This hall isn't about that. Its architecture conveys openness and light. It's a space that invites people to share experiences together at eye level.
Gemeinschaftliche Erlebnisse zu haben.
State receptions and world-class concerts were held here in the Beethoven-Halle, and even boxing matches, all in the spirit of good international relations, and of course presidential elections. Society, politics, and culture came together.
Also die Aufgabe der Kultur ist für mich immer wieder.
For me, culture's job is to build bridges and bring people together.
Auch für Gruppen, die
It encourages the democratic ideal, being open and willing to question your own thoughts. I think you should leave an event feeling different than when you entered.
Anders aus einer Veranstaltung rausgeht, als man reingegangen ist.
Even the Bundesbühnchen got an upgrade, but kept its small-town charm nonetheless. It was a place for politicians to breathe between sessions, looked after by Jürgen Rausch.
Norbert Blüm often met people here and bought gummy bears. Joschka Fischer loved Asterix comics. He'd grab every new one from my hands. And Helmut Kohl was a fan of cheese sandwiches. I made him so many.
Under Helmut Kohl, what Bonn had been working toward for 40 years finally came true and took everyone by surprise.
At that point, I was in Germany for over a decade, and I didn't see that coming at all.
After a peaceful revolution in the East, the wall came down. Reunification at last. The long years of diplomacy had paid off.
Wir ziehen einen Schlussstrich unter die leidvollen Kapitel der Vergangenheit und machen den Weg frei für einen Neubeginn.
On October 3, 1990, East and West Germany became a unified state once again, based on the 1949 Constitution. Euphoria swept the nation. It was a historic moment that moved the world. But meanwhile in Bonn, the mood was uneasy.
Dann stand sofort auf
The
der
immediate
Tagesordnung
question was, where should the government and parliament sit? Should we return to Berlin as promised for 40 years? Or would Bonn stand and stay the capital?
Oder hat Bonn ein großes Eigengewicht und eine große Beharrungskraft?
One thing was the optics, the feeling that Berlin had to be the capital again. But for the actual work, I thought a compromise wouldn't have been a bad thing. Keep the political work here and use Berlin for representation.
A heated debate followed in Parliament, emotional speeches and fundamental questions. Finally, on June 20th, 1991, a narrow vote decided in favor of the move to Berlin. Construction began at record speed. The Reichstag, Parliament buildings, new ministries. This was no provisional setup. It was built to last in a global metropolis reborn. Even the legendary Bundesbühnchen got a spot in Berlin, though the cheese sandwiches made way for haute cuisine.
In Bonn ist diese Entscheidung mit
The decision was met with great despair in Bonn. People feared economic collapse. It's still hard for some locals to stomach the loss of the state receptions and the festivities.
Und viele schöne Feste.
The Bonn-Berlin Act aimed to soothe these fears. Some ministries stayed on the Rhine. The UN moved into the Langer Eugen. Corporations and research were incentivized. And the original Bundesbütchen, a protected landmark.
Das zeigt sich natürlich bis heute, dass Bonn immer noch eine Stadt ist.
Even today, Bonn is more culturally ambitious than other cities its size.
Gleicher Größe durch eine Gesellschaft, die
it's still shaped by that era.
Einfach noch geprägt ist von dieser Zeit.
The Beethoven-Halle remains the symbol of this modest yet brilliant era. It's been extensively renovated, future-proofed. German President Steinmeier himself inaugurated it, a powerful cultural statement.
Die Beethoven-Halle wurde zum Wahrzeichen für die Stadt Bonn. Mehr noch, sie gehört tatsächlich zum kulturellen Erbe unseres Landes. Ein Ort der Demokratiegeschichte.
Das alles zusammen
It all creates a fascinating mix. The political history, Bonn as the city of Beethoven, and today's search for who we really want to be.
Nach dem, was wir eigentlich sein wollen.
Bonn never meant to be a capital, yet it shaped German democracy. With humility and diplomacy, it found the perfect path to rebuild a nation. What do you think? Was moving to Berlin the right call, or should the government have stayed in Bonn? Let us know in the comments.